where it's lacking, and they won't engage. They would rather bury you in this word salad than they would put their own views to the test against the acid of an opposing view. And that's part of the problem. A lot of conservatives will just throw their hands up and say, I don't have time for this. And so when you do that, they go, aha, I won. And they eventually, conservatives get browbeaten into silence because nobody likes being called names. Nobody likes to be told you're an idiot or you're a moron. And I'm being harsh on those on the other side of the coin, but I've been through it too often to know that it's just me, that they do that with everybody who opposes them. So from my perspective, I think that one of the better tactics is once they're done this, yeah, that's nice. Okay, I hear you, but let's get back to what matters. And dive right back in and drag them back, kicking and screaming, say, how are you going to deal with this? Here's the reality. I understand everything you just said, but here's the reality. The sun won't come up in the west no matter how badly you want it to, no matter how many words about it you write. You cannot change the way the earth revolves. And so how are you going to deal with the fact the sun comes up? I'm using a ridiculous analogy to make the point. And let them try to explain it. Either they'll go, oh, well, you're just one of those ideologues, or you're just you're just a this or you're just a that. And frustrating as it is, they tend to drop into the gutter and then vanish.
Yeah, and it's funny because as I think we've talked about on this show before, Nick, and I cannot stress this enough, conservatism is not an ideology like liberalism or progressivism or libertarianism or anything like that.
It's a lifestyle.
Being a conservative is, in fact, the opposite of ideology. We are not ideological. That's why we're comfortable saying we prefer to maintain the status quo. If it's the old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yep.
That's not an ideological position to take. It's very practical, period. On the other hand, if you come and say, but if we tweak it this way, if we do this, then it's going to address a problem. And this is another very big difference between us and them, us and virtually everybody else. I'm speaking as a conservative, is that I'm not interested in fixing things that don't need fixing. So, okay, I'm not saying that we can't make improvements, and I'm all for change. But, before we start going down the road of tearing things down and rebuilding them, maybe we should be able to say, what is the problem first? So, what's the proper sequence? Here is a problem. First question you have to ask yourself is this a problem that, as a government, collectively, that we, A, have an interest in solving, and B, that we can solve? Can't this be solved amongst just free people doing it amongst themselves? Or then, if not that, well, maybe we could do it through local government. And if not that, then maybe we could do it through provincial government if you happen to be in Canada, or state government if you're in the United States. Or if not that, then maybe we have to have something that's national government. But the very first question is, do we have to have a policy on this at all? So, a lot of times I look at my friends, especially on the left of the political spectrum, and I think to myself, gosh, you guys, you're all about solutions looking for problems.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You're not about solving problems. You're not looking for the problems and then saying, okay, how do we solve them? You're coming up with solutions that comport to your particular ideological outlook, and then you're looking around looking for the problems that you're going to solve with it.
Well, let me give you an example of a perfect example of what you're talking about, or at least I think it is. Let's say a community wants to have a recreational facility, an ice rink, so the kids can play hockey. There's about 3 different ways you can do it. You can get some kind of federal grant. You can get provincial money. Maybe the municipality pays for it, or people come together as a community, do fundraising, raffles, bake sales, whatever, and hire a contractor and build it themselves the way that they used to. Which one actually solves the problem best? My estimation is that you would have a much tighter community with something they can all point to and say, I had a part in building that, and a sense of civic pride that you don't get at the other levels.
Right.
And I think that's that you can modify that example into 1,000 different ways. Take MRI machines. First of all, repeal the law that says you can't have one privately run. That's number one. But once that's done, and you have a philanthropist within your community that says, look, I'll fund this thing for the first 10 years, and after that it's your baby to keep it funded and run. And he builds it in the parking lot of a hospital, so the hospital doesn't have to wait 6 months or 3 months or whatever the waiting list is for an MRI, and let the community come together. And they're doing this already in certain elements, like I know at St. Francis Hospital in Barry's Bay, you have the ability to buy a brick in the wall and provide funding to help the hospital buy things the government doesn't cover. So why not extend it to an MRI machine? I mean, these are just examples of that kind of thinking. And I think that one of the things that behooves conservatives to do is not only to say, how are you going to pay for that, but to follow it up, say, have you ever considered?
Right. In other words, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's an extremely positive and useful suggestion. And that is, when somebody's coming and saying, don't ask how we're going to pay for it. Make a suggestion. Say, okay, rather than having to jump through all these regulatory hoops and all that, why don't we just get together and build a skating rink? Let's just get together and do it.
Well, my hometown is building a new fire hall. It's coming out of municipal funds, okay? Probably some provincial money. But I suggested at the time, say, look, why don't we do this amongst ourselves? We'll name it after a prominent citizen who's just died. Been in the, he was over 80 and was a real pillar of society within that little community. Why not name it in his memory? And then we'll get together and build what we can afford, because it's going to be a beautiful fire hall. I have a feeling they'll move the town council chambers into the building and do a lot of administration, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, sell off the buildings you have now and move into a more modern facility. There's no problem with that as long as the money is put to good use from the sale. Don't squander it on bike paths in the town of 700, okay? Put it back to help pay off the fire hall, or just as an example. So I think if people began to suggest these things who are of a conservative point of view, they probably would get a lot farther than going, we can't afford it. We don't have the money. We can't afford any more taxes. They're right on all of that stuff, but that horse has been whipped to death and laid on the track and rotted.
And it's not, I hate to say this because I know people are going to, be upset with me for saying it, but frankly, it's really not the issue. The affordability is a factor you have to take into account, but the real question is, do we need to have this service? And if we need to have this service, or we need to have this facility, or if the people just want to have the facility, then, I don't just automatically knee-jerk say, well, we can't afford it, end of discussion. But say, okay, what can we do in order to afford this that we're not going to burden our neighbors in the next community? We're not going to go and certainly we don't want to burden our children with the cost of putting this together today. I mean, who knows whether they're going to want it 10 or 20 years from now when they come of age. So I hear what you're saying. But again, I stress this. I think it's critically important that we understand the value of not being afraid to show that we care and not being shy in pointing out that as caring people, many of the approaches that we take to government and to society, etc., are actually because we know that they work better, and we do care about people, and we want to see people not suffering. We don't want people wallowing in poverty. We don't want people wandering around waiting for medical treatment that they're never going to get because we have a rationed system. We want our fellow Canadians and First Nations communities and beyond to have clean drinking water. Mm-hmm. That's a worthwhile project.
Yep.
That's something that is hard to do in many of these communities, small communities, poor communities. That's something where I could very easily say, yeah, that's something that the government should do at a higher level, because we do have the ability to tax, and I think that's something that the government should be prepared to do.
Yeah, especially in a community where it doesn't have the tax base or the population base.
Precisely.
To do these kind of things.
That's what I mean by a poor community. I don't mean necessarily they're wallowing in poverty.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Attawapiskat. There's not a lot of people outside that community that live in the area that could actually step up and do that. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's any.
I think it is, I'm speaking as a conservative, I think that it is an absolute crime that we are not focusing our resources on ensuring that those communities have clean drinking water. I really do. I think it's absolutely wrong. And when I look at the kinds of things that we squander our finances on, while these communities, who wants to stay in a community where you can't get clean drinking water?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, but a lot of the people there are trapped. And anyway, it's a longer conversation. We're not going to solve these problems overnight, Nick. But yeah. Well,
you appoint me king, I'll solve them tomorrow.
Well, who knows? Maybe with the current royal crisis, who knows? Anyway, just looking at the time, ladies and gentlemen, we have to go for a break, so we're running a little over time. If you're listening to the podcast, thank you for joining us, and make sure you join us for part 4, which should be posted tomorrow morning. And don't forget to go back and listen to previous podcasts and tell your friends and neighbors about us. If you're listening live, stay with us. We'll be back in a few minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.